how to make money from subject to real estate. It's two words, subject and then TO. Now, subject to is a really interesting concept that I want to explain to you. Basically, it's a way that real estate investors often get built-in financing for their purchase without having to go through a credit check, without necessarily having to come up with a deposit or all the normal closing costs or loan application fees, or even waiting. You can close on a subject to deal literally same day if you have all your ducks lined up. So much, much easier. So what is it? Subject to real estate means that you're buying the property, but you're buying it with its existing mortgage still in place. Now, some people don't know this, but you can buy a property without paying off the mortgage. Now, it does carry certain risks, which I'll get into shortly, but most importantly, you can legally do this. The way that a property is transferred is through a deed. A deed is a document that says, I, the seller, transfer ownership to you, the buyer. The seller signs it, and it's done. That's recorded in the courthouse, and you have an official transaction. And the loan still sits in place. Now, that does give the lender, in most instances, the ability and the excuse to foreclose if they want to. And they may or they may not foreclose. Usually I would say they probably wouldn't, but there are no guarantees. So when you use this strategy, you're taking a risk that the lender could decide to institute a foreclosure action and legally force the property to be sold to pay off that loan. That's because of something you'll hear of called the due on sale clause. And due on sales were DUE, on sale clause. That's a paragraph that exists in most mortgages that says that if the property is sold to a new owner, you must pay off the mortgage. If you don't pay off the mortgage, then the mortgage company has the right to call a default and to then foreclose on the property. Now, of course, foreclosure is not an instant process. So if you're a real estate investor trying to expand your portfolio quickly without having a lot of your own cash, maybe not having enough credit to do this, then this is a valid way for a real estate investor to proceed. You are taking a risk that there could be a foreclosure. And of course, if there's a foreclosure, you could have to answer to the former owner as well, who'd be pretty annoyed that there's a foreclosure that involves their credit and could get them sued. But all that being said, I think that this is a good strategy for real estate investors to know about, especially if you're using this as shorter term financing. So for example, we used to do this when I was doing pre-foreclosure properties. So I would go and talk to owners who were in foreclosure, and often they weren't ready to do anything until very shortly before the foreclosure auction. Like they would exhaust all their options. They would be within a week or so of the foreclosure and they'd realize, hey, I've got nothing left. I've got no way to stop this foreclosure and I'm just done. So what could I do? I would talk to people like that and say, well, look, what I can do is I can take over the property with its existing mortgage. I'll come up with the money to reinstate the mortgage. What reinstating means is I'm going to come up with the money to catch up on the mortgage payments. And typically reinstatement is going to involve paying all the past due mortgage payments along with the late fees and penalties and the costs of foreclosure so far. I'm going to reinstate the mortgage, which means put it back in good standing, and then take over the property. And in those instances, we would then fix up the property and sell it. And typically we were out of that deal within 5 or 6 months. That was much sooner than any mortgage company was ever foreclosing. Because even if a mortgage company does attempt to foreclose, that's a process. And there are legal ways to slow down that process. But I don't think this is something you'd want to do over a long term. You don't want to build up a rental portfolio with subject to houses where you have no plan to refinance them and get out from under those loans. But I will say, if you build a performing rental portfolio, even if it were with subject to properties, then you could, after you get history on the properties and some cash flow, it's conceivable that you could get replacement financing and pay off those mortgages. And there's no reason that you can't get replacement financing. I mean, you own the property, you can mortgage it. It's just when you remortgage it with a new loan, you're going to need to pay off that old loan. So make sure you set it up that way. There are risks. I don't see them as overly onerous as long as you have a plan to get out. I do think this is a great way for a real estate investor to buy more properties than they'd otherwise be able to buy. But here's the thing. Real estate investors usually think this way. They're like, well, I got to get a deal. And they find a property that they could buy where a seller will talk to them and they get all excited. And about 2 seconds after the seller says, all right, I'll sell to you, immediately the real estate investor panics and says, well, how am I going to get the money for this? And they hit the panic button. And you realize that under our conventional lending system, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, all those government agencies that pretty much control the market, they really don't want to lend to real estate investors who want to build up a portfolio of 20, 30, 40, 50 houses. They don't want to do that. They don't want that much exposure to one investor. So you'll have a really hard time with financing until you're in a position to raise private capital, meaning you're in a position to go out to investors who will lend money to you to buy houses, and they want a return on that money. But it takes a while to get there. And so good strategy in the beginning is to do this subject to real estate. But here's the most important thing to remember. Just because you can get it financed doesn't mean that you should buy it. The financing dog should not be wagging the deal's tail. What do I mean by that? I mean that if it's a bad deal, I don't care if financing is built in. A bad deal is a bad deal is a bad deal. And you'll be sorry that you ever got that property if you pay too much for it, or you get a terrible property in a terrible neighborhood that has no upside. So make sure that you look first at whether it's actually an economically viable and good deal. And what does that mean? It means, number one, that you're buying it cheaply enough, if it's a flip deal, to fix it up and sell it and have a profit built in. And for most flippers, if you do the math, you're going to see that the math says that you need 30 to 40% off of the as-is value of that property minus your fix-up costs. I know that seems like a huge number. I know you're like, you're crazy, you can't get houses that cheap, blah, 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 blah. Yes. So what I'm going to do for you, just because you're special, is I'll put a link down below where you can get my Flipper spreadsheet absolutely free. It's a spreadsheet that I use when I pick a property to flip. Just put in the math. Put in the amount you're going to pay for the property, put in the amount of the repair costs, put in the other costs, and it'll spit out a number on the bottom that will give you your estimated profit. And make sure that you give a healthy number for the rehab and renovation. Most renovation jobs go significantly over budget. Most of them take longer than you think they're going to take. So make sure that you give a healthy number. Don't sit there and try to make a deal where there isn't one by just fiddling with your numbers. Say, well, it's not really $10,000 to do that. I can get it done for $5,000, or I'll do it myself on weekends. No, don't do that. Don't force the deal. When you force a deal, you're making a mistake. So use the Flipper spreadsheet with my full compliments. That'll help you understand the math. But giving you the bottom line answer, the math is 30 to 40% off the after repaired value, meaning what's it worth when you sell it, minus your fix-up cost. You do that, you'll have a sufficient margin. If you're talking about a property to rent, I use the 1% rule. What's the 1% rule? That is that your monthly rents need to be at least 1% of the purchase price in order for this thing to even make any sense at all. And you do more refined math than that, but my first thing I look at is the 1% rule. So I'll say, all right, if I'm going to pay $200,000 for a property I'm going to rent out, I better be getting $2,000 a month in rent. If I'm not, the deal is going to end up as negative cash flow, and I'll be sorry that I ever bought the property. So make sure that you do that math. And matter of fact, I'll do it for you just because you're paying attention this long. I'll put my rental property calculator spreadsheet under there too. You can put in your rents, you can put in your costs, and it'll give you an estimated cash flow as well. These are tools that I use in my own business. They're relatively simple to use. All that you need to do is put them in either Google Docs or in Microsoft Excel, and you can use these documents yourself. These will help you estimate your numbers accurately. And never, 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 never in real estate should you ever force a deal. The deal's not there, renegotiate it until it is there, meaning pay a low enough price until it's there, or walk on and go to the next deal. Good real estate investors are looking at 100 deals for every deal that they buy, and you should do the same. Where I see people that fail in real estate, and I've done coaching for many years in real estate investing, is when they get frustrated and they say, well, I just need a deal, and they buy a property that they overpay for, and then they wish they'd never gotten it. So don't be that guy or that woman. Make sure that you do not force the deal. Anyway, back to our subject to real estate. So with subject to real estate, basically you're going into a seller who's very, very motivated, probably has a very looming problem, and they're willing to let you just take over the loan. Your best prospect for this is someone who's facing foreclosure like next week, and they know they have no other options. And you may as well come in there. You'll reinstate the mortgage. The way you do that is you ask the mortgage company or their lawyer if they're foreclosing, or the trustee, what's the reinstatement figure? they'll give you the calculations and they'll say, well, here's what you need to reinstate it. Sometimes you can get payment plans on it. You might be able to put a portion down and then do a payment plan. Don't tell them you're taking over the loan. If you do, they're going to say no because that's against the rules. So just ask them and make sure that you get a power of attorney in these deals so that you can act on behalf of the borrower going forward, because once they're out from under the pressure of that foreclosure, they may never talk to you again. So just make sure that you get that power of attorney so that you can move forward. So this is Attorney Bob Diamond. Hope this is helpful. Hope this helps you grow your real estate portfolio. For more information like this, you can subscribe to the channel. I talk about real estate investing. I talk about Overages, which is a business related to real estate that I do that I think is wonderful. And I try to give you useful things like my flipper spreadsheet and my rental spreadsheet and other things that can help you in your journey forward to entrepreneurial success in real estate. So thanks for being here, and I'll see you next time.